nitasimama, nitachukua hatua, nitahesabika.
Welcome now to our panel. We are going to have a panel discussion. I should probably start by introducing myself. My name is Cosima Gatere. I'll be your host for the rest of this session. I am also in the area of organizational change and change leadership. I train and consult and speak in the area of leadership, and also specifically in building leadership and personal trust. So personal trust for leaders and also organizational trust. The more trusted an organization is, the more business it does, the more trusted a leader is, the more that leader is able to bring about change in their particular organization. And that is what we hope to get more insights from the distinguished panel I have got here with me. I will introduce the panelists to you, starting from my immediate left. There are people who would not be new to many of you. To my immediate left is Dr. Edward Ouko. Many of you would know him as the immediate former Auditor General. A very tough job indeed. Lots of change that he tried to bring about, and we would very much like to hear about his experience, and just ask him if his experience actually not only taught him a lot, but also shortened his life, because it was, I used to look at what he's going through and really feel for him. But Dr. Edward Ouko is our immediate former Auditor General. Next to him is Flora Mutahi. She is the immediate past chair of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. She's also the founder of Melvin Marsh International, the lady, the person who introduced flavored teas to Kenya. And she is also chairing the national body against counterfeit. So all these counterfeits that are being imported into the country, she's actually chairing the body that is trying to fight against that, so that we actually buy Kenyan and build Kenya. Next to her is Dr. Vincent Ouko. He is Vice Chancellor of Strathmore University, and he'll be talking to us about what Strathmore is doing and some of the paths that they hope to beat to in the future. And we have at the far end Christine Orono. She is a banker, and she is an expert in people, change, and culture. She works with ABSA, which you know formerly was known as Barclays. Wow, you guys are so, Christine, you've done a good job, well done. And she had, was a long-time banker with Barclays, but actually had left and was brought back to help lead the change from Barclays to ABSA. So that is very fresh in her mind, and she can tell us how that whole branding change and also what other changes that went along with in the whole organization as far as culture and values and so on. I don't think it was just a change from, was it blue to red? But there's a lot more that underlies that. So please join me in welcoming the panel and giving them a warm hand. Let me start with Dr. Ouko. It's good to see your smile on your face. You actually look a lot younger now. I think after, is it what, how many months now since you stepped down?
About 6 months.
About 6 months. You were obviously dealing with a number of challenges, because this is not a new position, the Auditor General, but we're talking about taking this position when there were new changes in the Constitution, the national governments, the devolved governments, but you also had very different structures you needed to deal with, both in the Senate, in Parliament. And there are, issues of budget that were not entirely for you to decide. Your budget needs to be approved by some of the very people, in fact, who you are auditing. So just tell us about, what did you say? I know there were many, but maybe just narrow down to maybe 2, no more than 3 of the biggest challenges you faced, the biggest obstacles you faced, and the biggest mountains that you really wanted to demolish, or the changes you wanted to bring about in your previous role.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. And thank you very much, Dr. Pierce, for a very inspiring talk and illuminating ideas about leadership. I don't know how long I've got, but allow me to just give a bit of background, I came to join, to be in the position of Auditor General from outside Kenya. I was in an international institution. I was coming for the first time from what you'd call international setting into a public, to manage and lead a very important public institution in Kenya. I've never worked at all in government. I didn't know how it works. But here I was being appointed in a very honorable position of, under the new constitution, as the Auditor General of Kenya for 8 years, a mandate strictly of 8 years, which has just ended. Now, coming from the public sector, it was very clear to me that I was coming to manage over 1,000 people who were very apprehensive of who I was and what was my aim, especially as you know, it had been tweeted that I had taken a salary cut to come and serve the country. So the very first thing which dawned on me was that I must earn the trust of the people. That was very clear to me. So how did I, first of all, had to send that trust? The first thing I realized that although I had the opportunities to make what you'd call a big bang change, I decided that I was not going to disturb anything in my office, especially immediate office, where my successor had been. Many people had urged me to, you have to change the secretary, you have to get new people, and indeed I had the right to do that. But that was the first mark of my action, to ensure that they don't see me as a person who's coming to disturb them first. So I decided deliberately that I was not going to get anybody from outside. I'll work with the people I found. So that was very important. The other thing is over time you had to create yourself. Let them see passion in you. Let them see that you are concerned, that you are concerned about the issues. And that was very simple. We're in a new dispensation. There is no way we could continue doing things the way we are doing. We have to try and do something different in the context of the new dispensation. And that we are going to do it by ourselves, for ourselves. Nobody from outside is going to do that. So that was very important. The other thing is, it was very clear that you must show empathy and show concern for them, for the staff. And one of the most important things was the staff welfare. So staff welfare was very important to ensure that they see you as fighting, even though you didn't have all the powers. But they must see the good faith in you that you're really concerned about their welfare. So that was very important. So there are these stages. There's the stages I agree very much with Dr. Pierce. There has to be some passion, driving, some purpose. Yourself, first of all, you must be convinced of that purpose. Then people must see you in your behavior, in your day-to-day, living that passion, talking that passion. And then you must earn the trust of the people. And then earning the trust also involves being mindful very much first of their welfare, before even we started talking about what then would be our strategy. So that then they understood, and again, trust means you must give them, you must show them that you have confidence in them. So we managed then to have, first of all, on my side, the trust, fight for the welfare, and then start telling them, now we have to change. We have now to look at strategy. So we did. Now, the second thing is, change is those are the steps which I did to try and get all the basics into place. But the bigger change was how we do our work. How we're going to do our work differently. And that, because you had some 1,000 people all over the countries, some have been there 40 years, some 30 years, some 20 years, and realize that they've been doing their work in an approach to work was quite different. So there was a need for what to enter their minds, what you call mindset change. Change their mindset. But changing a mindset of 1,000 people is not easy. You've got to find something which they can rally to. You've got to find a theme they can rally to. And that theme to me was very clear. I said, look, in what we are going to oversight, we know we cannot oversight unless, first of all, you have what you call a budget. Simple thing. Because you cannot spend a government's penny without a budget. So do we all agree budget is a major control tool? That was very simple. People agreed, and therein lies the beginning of the mindset change. So have we been doing it that way? No, we have not been. Oh, it makes you. So there was that element of mindset change. But the change was continuous because the mindset change had to come in before you talk about the technological change. Because you came into the office, I realized was heavily paper-full office. Documents were piled up and all that. And I realized that this cannot go on. So you really had to now look at how we're going to do our work in a most efficient, in automated way, and actually introduce people to computers. When I came in, there were, I think in terms of laptops, there were no laptops. There were some desktop computers scattered which were gathering dust. But I realized that there was no way we had to break the jinx there. And the first thing was how, I'm almost finishing, the first thing was how to get them to start embracing the technology. That was another one. Now, all this then, as Dr. Pierce said, there's a purpose must be there. You must, as a leader, want to make change and be seen to be passionate about it. Then you must develop frameworks which will ensure that principles and other things are respected, and then the practice is how you're going to go about it. Thank you very much. But there's one thing which I have now, somebody would always ask what's my regrets, whatever, after 8 years, is that I'm just questioning myself whether the ladder which I climbed was a long one. And on second thoughts, much as I think I've climbed the ladder, there's a lot more to do, but sometimes now I question myself whether I lived truly to what was required of me, and for that I ask for forgiveness.
Thank you very much for that. And I hope you noticed that he says that he didn't come in first thinking about strategy or thinking about technology. He came in thinking about people. So the people are the strategy. And he says that winning the trust of the people was, in fact, the most important strategy. So he really had his priorities right. And it's after winning the trust of the people, after having got their confidence, after showing that he's really rooting for them, that he's interested in their welfare, that he begins discussing issues of strategy and issues of audit and so on. So he really put the people before the project, which is, I think, is very important. Flora, I'd like to come to you. And you are in the area of manufacturing, one of the big four. In fact, the big four happened, I think, during your tenure as chair, and I know you are actually quite instrumental in seeing that happens and pushing very hard for manufacturing to be included. I think one of the things you certainly did when you were chair was to give a lot of visibility to the Kenya Association of Manufacturing. You certainly made it a very visible, certainly a very vocal organization. And you I know that you have said in the past that this wasn't just given to you on a platter. You actually had to fight for the interests and the welfare of the manufacturers and the manufacturing sector. So tell us about how you went about that. What would you say were some of the ways in which you realized you had an objective and there were all these obstacles? How did you go about bringing about those reforms during your tenure?
All right, thank you very much. Let me begin by when I got there, CAM is a very organized BMO. It was 57 years old by the time now they had asked me to step into chairmanship. And of course, there was a big hoo-ha that, this is the first lady in 57 years. And I remember thinking, okay, I can either make it or break it. As in, will they ever ask another woman to be, to be at the helm? So I had basically three principles or three commitments I made to them. And the first one I said I would do is I said I will engage. I will engage with, let me first give a little bit of history about KAM. Kenya Association of Manufacturers is, like I said, 50. Now we're 60 years old. An organization that advocates for the benefits of manufacturing. And that's to government, to have a conducive environment, to have the right policies. And I had been a member of the organization for at least 10 years. So I said, I'll continue to engage with government at county and national level. And the other thing I said I would do is I would entrench all the principles and policies that we had created to make sure that we follow them. So, and the other thing I said I would do is also push for the expansion of, be it markets, be it, are we including everybody? Is the woman included? While I was actually there, I set up a thing called Women in Manufacturing, where, because there are very few women in manufacturing, you can actually count them on your hands, yet a lot of women manufacture. They just don't realize it's manufacturing. They do knitting, they do crisps, they do sauces, so to sort of like grow that. So that's basically those are the three things that I made sure that I did. And the most important thing to me is A, showing up. Of course, being a strong BMO, we got a lot of invitations. And we used to sit with the team and actually say, we have to show up here, we have to show up here, we have to show up here. You have to really, literally, and it's not about just showing up, it's about engaging. What are you saying? What are you pushing? And even when government would call us, would go and say, okay, ease of doing business is yes, you're doing ease of doing business. Can we now look at cost of doing business? And we realized you can't keep making noise. You've got to be solution-based. And that's one of the things we kept saying. We always went with solutions. So we would spend 5 minutes explaining what our challenges are, but we'd spend the rest of the time really saying, this should be handled in this manner. And that would bring a very, very good engagement. You'd sit with them and they would say, okay, I hear this is how you think this should be done, but this has got other consequences. And I believe that's where we really succeeded in really bringing out, strengthening KAM. I keep saying, I have this joke where I say, I was actually standing on shoulders of giants. KAM was already a very strong BMO. And all I did is just literally continue to push, to continue to engage with everybody and make sure that we continue to strengthen. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Dr. Ogutu from Strathmore University. We all think very highly of Strathmore University. I'm wondering if there's anything to change, And I wonder what you're doing on the panel. Maybe you should just take back your seat because, why change a winning formula, But maybe you see things from the inside. And I'm sure no person, gets to your position as Vice Chancellor, which is, really effectively the CEO, just to maintain status quo. When you're there, you have a certain vision. There's a certain point you want to move the organization to. So just tell us, what do you think are the key changes that you are seeking to bring about in Strathmore? What are the key challenges from your perspective?
Okay, thank you very much, Cosmo. So as you've heard, I'm a teacher. So what we teachers do is we take wisdom from elsewhere and we package it in very attractive ways so that people actually begin to live that wisdom. So rather than start a new conversation, we have a conversation that Professor Pierce started, and I'm going to try and connect that with what we do at Strathmore and how we try to apply the principles he's talking about. So he talked about practice. That's probably the easiest one, where you're trying to look at quality control, compliance, having the right habits in place. But again, as Professor Pierce pointed out, that's not culture. If you don't inject the purpose and the principles, then it's just a practice which, when the leader leaves and somebody else comes in, it'll change overnight. What we saw with Mishuki in Kenya, he came in, he made the Matatus behave, he put a new practice. The minute he was removed, we reverted because it didn't become culture, the way we do things around here. So for it to become culture, you have to influence the first two things he talked about, purpose and practice. And the best thing I think I can do is to just second what he said and make it real for us. That's what we teachers do. So now let me speak about principles, so the second one. And he said a different way of calling it is values. Now values for me, there's a magic in that word values. That's why we even speak about it. Because if you have certain values and they are lived values, they are real, then they actually influence the way you behave. And it's not about compliance anymore. People want to do this because they value it. They see it as very valuable. It's very important to them. So what you do reflects what your values are. You can say whatever you want. You can have values on pieces of paper. Again, he mentioned that. Or we could just look at your behavior, and by their fruits you shall know them, as we're told in Scripture. So just look at the fruits and you can deduce what that person's values are. Are they inherently very selfish? Are they just self-interested? Are they proud? Just by looking at their behavior, you know what their values are. But of course, we are aspirational. We can also set the values and then begin to try and live them by deeply, deeply reflecting on the values. And if you ask me what culture is a particular constellation of values. So every organization has its culture, the way they do things. How did they arrive there? By having a certain combination of values that makes them unique. That's what defines them. And if you have a particular combination that's perfect for you as a person, you should have your own values, or as an organization, that combination of deep beliefs that influence the way you behave is what constitutes your culture. So at Strathmore, we have 8 values, and the way we arrived at it was not setting the aspiration first and then, trying to live up to it. But we had a consultant ask everyone, from the 1961 when Strathmore was founded, what does Strathmore mean to you? What do you think of when you say Strathmore? And by deducing, by induction, by going backwards, we were able to say, if you remove any one of these 8 things, it stops being Strathmore. And so to your question, what's my job? What do I see my job as at Strathmore? Why do I think they hired me? And it's because I have an intimate knowledge of the culture from 1961. I'm not that old, but I've had the incredible privilege of knowing the people who founded Strathmore, living with some of them. And so one of the things I will be tried on at the last judgment will be, you had this incredible privilege. What did you use with that knowledge? What did you do with it? So I have a very, very deep understanding of the culture and its roots and how every particular value was generated and what was the historical influence that led to that becoming an integral part of Strathmore. So I have that understanding. But then I'm also modern. So I'm always hanging out with the students, talking about geeky kind of stuff, technology, blockchain, artificial intelligence, sports, talents. I'm very excited about all of that. So the council wanted someone with that combination. We're moving into modern times. We have to, but we don't want to lose the culture. So how will we do it? And my biggest job is to translate the same values into a modern context and say, here's how we live freedom and responsibility, one of our values. Here's how we live excellence. That's probably the one most people know us for. Here's how we live ethics and integrity. again, something that we're known for, and it's the theme for this year. Every year we pick one of the values and make it, this is what we're working on this year. So just as my parting words, just go deeper into what Professor Pierce said. It's not just about the habits. That's what people will see eventually. And you can achieve it with compliance, but it'll be temporary unless you make it part of your DNA, which means you have to unpack what your values are, go deeper into them, make them real deep beliefs, which means you have to do a lot of marketing and selling until it becomes a belief in people. And then even if you step aside, you can trust them to do it. So inject the purpose and the principles there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. I think that's powerful. You hear some keywords he's mentioning, like making the values and those principles part of your DNA. And the huge word, culture. And he said culture isn't, what exists in the manual, it's how it's lived. So actually, as we say in Change, that culture is caught, not taught. You observe the leaders doing it and you catch the bug, so to speak, rather than reading it from the policy manual. So I think that's some huge insight there. And also about how you take, the tradition is important, but how you transition that culture from the past and those values into the modern times, because things are always changing. And I think that's what I'd like to ask Christine to do, because, ABSA, Barclays is a bank, with a long history in Kenya. 1916, wow, 1916. So not too many organizations were founded back then. So lots of history, lots of tradition. And you were brought back, actually, to help them transition into ABSA. And I know this happens because of other, kind of corporate reorganization on the continent and so on. But how did you manage to bring that rich history, that rich tradition and the values from the past into this new ABSA organization? I'm sure ABSA, being a separate entity, had its own sets of values, its own cultures. How did you handle the culture clash?
Thank you for the question. First, let me say, I think externally, people don't probably understand the relationship that Barclays had with ABSA. Actually, ABSA was already part of Barclays Group. It was already within the group. But when Barclays decided to divest from Africa, we had to rebrand because we had to stop using the Barclays brand. But however, having said that, because ABSA had not yet been fully integrated into the Barclays culture, there was quite a lot of work to be done in terms of redefining how this organization was going to go further into the future. So it was actually quite a heavy task of actually transforming an organization from scratch. So everything that Dr. Pierce has mentioned is those steps, we actually had to go through those. So basically what we had to do was reboot the system. And reboot meaning that it's not really doing away with everything from the past, but really reworking and reimagining the organization afresh. We had to define our purpose. We had to define our values and principles afresh. So we basically had to go through those steps as if we were restarting the organization, even though we were 104 years. But what we still needed to do was appreciate where we came from, because that heritage was still a part of us and we were not going to throw it away. And so even in the process of all the steps that we went through, we engaged all the stakeholders that we work with, from our employees, our customers, and other stakeholders to give us feedback on what needs to be, what we need to do differently going forward. And actually, banks are not the most, can I say, they tend to be quite stiff places. Those who work in banks would probably agree with me. Banks can be quite rigid. Maybe it's because of the nature of the industry. But one of the key things we wanted to change with ABSA is the way we did things. We wanted to be seen more as a fun and vibrant and agile organization. Now, those who know Barclays probably would not identify with those words. And I can see some heads shaking here. It's true. I've had an association with Barclays for over 25 years, so I do understand. So you can imagine coming from that state into the new state that we had defined, where we want to be vibrant, we want to be agile. Words like fun never used to feature in banks. I don't think they feature in many banks. But that's one of the words we're using today. As we seek to shift the culture, we've got to get ourselves into a place where we can respond. We can be, people can see us as that organization that can respond to their needs. So our objective and our agenda with our culture transformation was to transform into an aspirational, fun, and vibrant place to work. That was a daunting task. And even when we said it to people, it sounded like, really? In a bank? How does that work? And so, so it's been a long journey. I can't tell you everything that we went through, but what was very key for us was co-creating with the colleagues, with the people. That really worked for us. So nobody came to us and told us what our values were going to be. We actually co-created them with every single employee in the organization. And so even when they were revealed what the values were, everybody could identify with them because they were part of that voice. And that really worked for us beautifully. We got people doing fun things like make songs out of these values. I mean, that's not conventional. Come up with a skit. You know, that doesn't happen in corporates. Come up with a poem. Because people inherently are emotional. So you've got to be able to catch them at their heart. And so what we did, I think some of those things that we did worked beautifully for us, is that get everybody to engage with these things we're saying, so that it is not a top-down approach. It is a bottom-up approach, where people really feel like they are part of this change that we are doing. So yeah, so a lot has happened. I can't say I've been in this change alone. It's been a very organized change. We have invested significant amounts of money in change. An organization as big as ours, with 3,200 staff, by the time you get everybody aligned, it requires quite some investment in terms of communication. We came up with vibrant ways of communicating. One of them was, if anyone has ever heard of Workplace by Facebook, it is an exact replica of Facebook, but closed within an organization. Yeah, that's a way and a means of us reaching everybody at the same time, simultaneously. Because we realize most of our employees today are young, they like social media, so we actually invested in that too. A social media platform for the organization, where you can constantly communicate in a fun way, using pictures, using videos, yeah? Not a circular. People today don't want to see those things, yeah? We've got to reach the hearts and the souls of people. And so we have our own social media platform. We find interesting ways of communicating, not the traditional means. So these are some of the ways in which we're trying to really infuse that fun culture we've been saying. We want to be seen by our stakeholders and customers as agile and fun. Then we've got to start from within. And those are some of the things I would, initially just put out there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christine. I'd like to move to the whole question of impact. You see, change doesn't just happen for change's sake. Change is meant to be purposeful. You change so that the organization can achieve certain objectives and also fulfill its mission and its purpose. And all of those things collectively is then what leads to what Dr. Pierce was talking about, the country then changing. And we don't give our children or our grandchildren our job to do. So I'd really like to talk about how all the things you've said are actually translating to real impact on the ground, something that these Kenyan citizens, these Wananchi, can actually feel. I'll start with you, Dr. Oko. You came into an organization that was kind of very, very institutionally set in its ways. You told us how you went about achieving the change. But I'd like to ask, how did you then create this team, this kind of coalition for change? People who are like-minded and who you felt that these are the people I can count on, we're fighting the same battle. Because I'm sure there are very many people, you're probably outnumbered by those who wanted to keep things as they were, because there were vested interests. I think it's not unknown that you are dealing on a very sensitive issue where if the audit doesn't work, the books don't balance, some money exchanges hands, and the people who've got no interest in changing the status quo. So how did you create your team, your coalition for change, and overcome the forces that were resisting change?
As I said, I had the philosophy, and my point of view was that the change was going to be done by us. So the word us was very important, and it is how I created that us. How did I create that us? Was first of all, my most immediate lieutenants were with me. But you had to tell them that it is not us going to start. We must make this change be from bottom up. So the first thing was to get that message that it is going to be from bottom up, build the structures whereby those, for instance, now we are talking about what is then going to be the office strategy. It was how you then, your lieutenants, went down the ground and created the teams to start that process. So you conceive it, but then you translate it to be a process which is bottom up. One thing is that as you do that, you have to find a way of rolling up your sleeve in that process. In other words, you have to go and start, at least be seen or embrace when the teams are discussing, to go there, come from your ivory tower, and go and actually sit and let them exchange with you in various, even as they decide. So as a leader, there is an element that there are occasions when you have to roll your sleeves. You must try and go down there, be seen to be with them, be seen to be simple, be seen not that knowledgeable, that title. The title is not going to be there. Let them see themselves in you and you in them.
And how did you overcome those resisting? You don't probably you didn't have the privilege to fire in the public sector, so you've got to find other ways of persuading them to toe the line. I think there were very many forces, and you had officers spread all over the country who were simply not going to take this change for the top, and they were resisting change. How did you persuade them and overcome those forces resisting change?
Very important. I think that one was more glaring when we started to automate the processes. Much as we tried to involve everybody, there was such a big suspicion and fear by those who have been there many years. Yet at the same time, we had really recruited a number of very young, very eager staff who were almost literally running with technology before us. So you had to, first of all, demystify this top element, because it was like a cloud which was seated on top of very eager people who wanted to learn. That was a challenge, I must say. And there was resistance sometimes. Actually, resistance was most immediate on my lieutenants. But at least that was good, because we could see them. I could keep them in eye. I could keep them in my radar, so that they don't create more havoc. So what it is you had to continually have a meeting, make sure you have a consistent meeting whereby you are reiterating things, and trying just to get their confidence and try to allay their fear. So that was the biggest way, to handle resistance. Because once I handled that one, down there was a chicken feed. They were ready to go. So that was the biggest problem, because many of the people had been there 35 years, 20 years, and so forth, and had never, actually, there were only desktops, there were no computers. As I say, I only had about 70 laptops. I had to have a serious campaign, seeking out resources to to actually bring laptops. And by the time I left, we almost have a 1-to-1 laptop ratio. And that was really very interesting because I made it now a point that as I decided now to open up positions, that the major interview was, look, it is there, I want you to send an email. Somebody, that's all. And that is when you realize people had struggled, but it is making people live the reality also is important, and telling them, look, don't be fearful, we'll teach you. And so we had even to teach people how to send emails.
Yeah, don't be fearful to send an email. So you left the organization with how many laptops? What was it? Was it 1-to-1 when you left?
No, by the time when I left, I've left, I believe anyway, one of my lieutenants are here who are very helpful, and he may want to say, when I left the office, we had automated the auditing process to be online. What does that mean? That means my staff technically can work anywhere in Kenya, review any file from at any place. In other words, right now, through the whatever is this network, I think he can actually review a file in Garissa right now. Somebody can be in touch with him on that process to review the file. So we left an office whereby when I came in, we had a backlog of about 4 years. We caught up, we overtaken that. The Constitution requires us to report within 6 months. In other words, the year end of the fiscal year is 30th June. We were to report within 31st March for both national government and the 47 counties. By the time I was leaving, we had already achieved a rate whereby we had reported on all the counties by January, and the national government by February.
Excellent, very, very well. I mean, that right there is huge organizational and institutional change, and I'm sure it translates, to better keeping of the books, both at the national and county level. And Dr. Gutu, I'd just like to ask, one of the objectives, of course, of people coming to the academy is so that they learn, but then they can also be better equipped to go and practice. Now, you are leading an organization that is well known for its values, not only for its academic excellence, but the values that underlie that. But the question is, would you really say that that is translating to impact in the marketplace? The graduates of your institution, are they applying not only what they've learned in the head, but in the heart? Is that really translating in the marketplace? I don't know if you have opened the newspaper and seen one of your alums, mentioned in a scandal, and what that does to you. So I just wonder, why we in the country aren't quite seeing the change that academies such as yours are trying to bring about through all the good work you're doing. What do you think is missing?
Okay, very, very good question, Cosmo, and obviously we are working on it. But I'm going to refer to something that Prof. Pierce talked about, where he said you can have a position of authority and assume that just by waving it at people, you'll get compliance, as if power comes from your position. So I like to think of 3 or 4 different kinds of power. The power you get with a gun, you can force people to do what you want them to do by using violence or force. You can get power by money. You can buy people out and get them to do what you want them to do. You can get power by being elected or being put in a particular position. But the kind of power, the 4th one that I actually invest in, is what I call either the power of influence or having the moral high ground. So in many organizations, you'll find somebody's powerful, and yet they're not the CEO. They don't have money. They just happen to be the person people listen to because they are the person who have won the respect of their people, kind of the trust that Dr. Ouko is talking about. So as educational institutions, which sort of power should we be promoting and getting our students and our faculty and alumni and community to have? And I think it is that last type of power where we're trying to get them to be exemplary citizens, to be highly dedicated, highly competent, and then through that to inspire, to become role models, and then to be able to create change in society because of their influence, not even because of their position, because that then makes it look as if you're not a CEO, you're not important at all. And again, that is something that Professor Pierce hinted at, where every single person in the organization is worshiping. Worship is not something you do at church. It's something you should do all the time. And at Strathmore, we talk about sanctification of work. So take your ordinary work and realize that by doing it well, by glorifying and honoring God through it, it becomes prayer. Prayer is really just honoring God, and by doing your work like Abel, offering the best work that you have, you now become a testimony to others. So what we try to teach them at Strathmore is that idea of do your work well. It doesn't matter what your work is, doesn't matter what position you hold, you will inspire and be in that circle of influence. And I'm sure you all like stories, and it's because they're so powerful, they capture our imagination. We cast ourselves as the hero in the story, we sort of identify, we want to become the hero in the story, in the movie, and that's why stories are so powerful. So if our life becomes a story, then it becomes influential, and now you're a leader, you're actually influencing change, people want to be like this guy, and I think that's the best way we can help as organizations, as academic organizations. Then remember, not everyone is going to go to college. Not everyone is going to go to Strathmore. We only want to have 7,500 students max, ever, which means what happens to the 1.6 million people who come into the market every year as grade 1 students? What happens to them when we only aspire to only speak to or teach 7,500? We're looking at leverage. So if you think of leverage, you have a lever. With a lever, you can, I don't know who said, was it Archimedes? Like, give me a lever long enough and I can lift the world. So, and it's technically possible. So if you do good and become an influencer, then suddenly you have leverage. You're not just influencing the 3 or 4 people in your team who see you doing good work. That story spreads, and then you influence, each of them influences more people and more people and more people, and now you have what I call leverage. So I think as Strathmore, the best way we can serve society is by applying the principle of leverage, or the multiplier effect if you're an economist and think that way. And so by just giving a good example, we inspire other people to do things well. So we're very happy working with other universities as well. They come to Benchmark, we sit with them, we share with them what we're doing. We don't see them as competitors. No, we have to be the best. And so by having everyone else staying behind, we're happy. No, we're not. Our job is to inspire. And so by helping other people also do the same work, we spread it out. There's 1.6 million people to reach, and we can only reach 7,500. So we need the help of all the other universities. And also the better they become, the better the competition. And now we actually have to be good. So you were saying, there's nothing to change. It's not true. We're on an upward trajectory. We're competing with the best universities in the world. So we're actually sending our students, competing against them internationally. And that's where we're benchmarking. So the sooner we have more people giving us serious competition, the happier we are, because it lights our fire. We have to work harder, which then makes us better, which then tells a better story, which then inspires more people. So leverage all over again.
Good, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, go ahead, yes, please, a round of applause. I'd like to open it up to questions, so please prepare your questions for the panelists, and please make your questions very candid and tough. These are the people who are, in charge of the economy, everything from public audits to manufacturing to academia to finance. The economy really turns on their wheels. I just like, as you prepare, the microphones moving around, to ask Flora to respond to one more question. Flora, I'd just like you to speak to the whole question of personal sacrifice that is required to bring about change. I know, from some of the things we've shared, that you had to spend a lot of personal time, personal energy, going way beyond what was required of you as a chair in order to bring about the change that is required. And sometimes this is often lost on people who see transformation, that there's someone behind the scenes working extremely hard, often beyond the call of duty, including, you could probably mention the anecdote about the time you wanted with senior government officials. They had given you 5 minutes, but you insisted and you got several hours. So just speak a bit to that, because change doesn't just happen by accident.
All right, thank you for the question. I think Dr. Pierce is the one who mentioned that leadership also comes with commitment. And I believe, like I mentioned earlier, I was, the first lady chair, so it was important for me to actually make a difference. And I don't know, the structure of KAM is a voluntary body, so I remember when the first time they asked me to do it, I said no. And we fought for a long time. And but my reasoning was around exactly what I knew it would take is time. I ran my own business, and I kept telling them, it has always been chaired by big people, the Mimals, the Pradeep Paranas, people who, they've got 3 PAs, they've got a whole team behind them. For me, I didn't have that size of an organization, and that's one of the things that I was resisting. However, having said that, and I took the position, I made a decision, this is what I'm going to do, and I would, to get people engaged. One of the things we did, we've got 14 sectors that sit under the, KAM, and those were sort of dead. So what I did is I would call the chairperson of that sector and ask them, what's your issue? We would come, sit. So on average, I would give about 40% of my week would be going to CAM, which is a voluntary body, like I mentioned. It was difficult. But again, I think with leadership, first of all, I think you mentioned you have to carry everybody along. So if somebody's not engaging, I would have to seek them out. What's the problem? So we went into strategy sessions. I kept telling my team, let's sit down with these sector bodies and find out what is the problem, why are they not? And they would tell us things like, very simple things. We have no structure, secretariat is weak. And we'd have to then go back to secretariat and ask them, what's your issue? The issue is like we don't get commitment from sector chairs. So it was just spending a lot of time really bringing everybody along. I think courage was also a very big one. Like you mentioned, okay, when the Big Four, manufacturing was mentioned as part of the Big Four, the president then called us and said, can all the leaders of the 4 different areas, manufacturing, health, come to me and tell me how you're going to help me achieve for what the Big Four. For us, we had to move from a contribution of 8% of GDP to 15% of GDP. Which meant a 33% year-on-year growth. Technically, almost impossible. So we went there and we made this presentation. And I remember, as the chair, it's up to you. So I called people, we deliberated, this is what we're going to say, this is how we're going to say it. And I then said, no, I don't like the way we are delivering. Coincidentally for me, we were hosting a breakfast, I think actually here. And somebody from BAT, their presentation was fantastic, very clear. I think we were talking to the Senate, very clear. And I went up and I said, "Who did this?" And they said, "We did. We did it internally." And I said, "Can we borrow your team because we're presenting to the president and we want it to be very, very clear." Anyway, long story short, get there to State House and we were told 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes of the Big Four. And I started saying, "No, guys, no. If you're really committed with this cause, 5 minutes is not enough." And I mentioned it to everybody. Actually, they'd said that the night before. I called everybody I knew. I don't know if I called you. But I called every single person that I knew. So anyway, finally, when I got there and I did our presentation, one, it was crystal clear because we had spent very many hours on it. It was crystal clear. And I remember everything we said, the president was nodding his head. And then eventually he says, "Anybody in this room in a hurry?" Because now they started signaling like I should get off. But I was very clear, I'm not getting off, and I finished my presentation. 25 minutes later, And he said, anybody in a hurry? And of course, you never replied to him. And you don't sort of say, I'm busy. And he said, shut down the room. Nobody's leaving. We are going to go through every single point she has discussed. So for me, had we not prepared properly, had we not put in those hours, I'm telling you, for that 1 week, we were leaving the office at 9 o'clock. So good team, but
and that meeting lasted how long?
Wow, 5.5 hours. I was on the floor for 5.5 hours. And I must just say the other three, pillars of the big four that were whatever said, thank God it was you who went, because we were nowhere near that level of preparedness. So I think it's important to be prepared and be prepared properly. And if you commit to something, especially as a leader, give it your all. Because if you don't show that leadership, it's not going to happen.
Wow. Thank you very much, Flora, for that story. So let us just have some questions from the floor. I'd like us to take them in rounds. So we'll just take a few rounds and get the panelists to respond. Just mention if there's a particular panelist you want to direct the question to, and please keep them concise. We'll start at the back.
Thank you. My name is Kahihu, and thank you, panelists, for such a great presentation. For us to lead organizational change, I think as Dr. Piers and all the four panelists have alluded to, it calls for a lot of courage. For whatever reason, we keep wondering, where do you people get this courage from? In moments of organizational change, there's a lot of discomfort, both within and without. There's a lot of resistance from within, from without, yet you have a vision, you have a purpose, and you must push it through. This simple requirement of courage, Dr. Ouko, where did you get it from? You're coming from outside, you need to transform the audit office, you know the ramifications, but you made a decision to push it forward. In a very simple way, I really would want to know, because Dr. Ogutu, I presume, at Strathmore you do not have the school of courage. Where do we get this courage from?
Okay, let's give the lady over there, the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Winnie. I'm the Executive Director for the African Council for Accreditation and Accountability. And we accredit Christian organizations for accountability and stewardship along 3 standards. And so my question is directed to Christine, because we credit Christian-owned businesses, Christian nonprofits and churches along 7 standards. Now, because we're looking at faith-based cultural transformation, my question is, how would you practically guide and lend your wisdom in transformation to Christian business owners with regard to faith-based cultural transformation in reasonably secular workspaces? So you're a Christian, you're professing and confessing your faith, but you are running a manufacturing plant. And we're talking about faith-based cultural transformation. And some of us will be assessing and accrediting you. What practical steps can you give so that that faith-based undergird is clear and evident in their leadership and in the organizational culture? Thank you.
Okay, let me take some from the other far end of the room. One hand at the corner there.
Hi, my name is Mweni Nyokavi, just to repeat. My question, I think, is to all or any of the panelists. We've talked about the impact that you've had. Mine is more your first failure or your first recognition of weakness or somewhere where something didn't go wrong, not necessarily in the positions that you're in or the ones that you are last in, but in the course of your journey. Your first, your second, your third. What did you do? How did you recognize it? And then what did you do with yourself at that time? It might actually be tied to the gentleman's question on courage. It may not be, but if you can answer that.
Let's take a question here there from Rogers at the far end, and then one from here, and then we'll handle those first.
Yeah, morning. My name is Rogers. This question is directed to Ouko and also Flora. In terms of values, and this country has been said is 85% Christian, but is also, some people have joked, 85% corrupt. How can we, as Christians, influence, or rather, play a part in reduction of poverty? For example, I know even in manufacturing, how do you deal with all those bottlenecks? You want to improve, like you've told us, from 8% of GDP to 15%, but there are so many corruption bottlenecks. How do we handle this moving forward?
And let's have the final one from here. Yes.
Morning, my name is Akwana Mahero. It's directed to Dr. Ouko. And we probably would like to see that one of the tools available to an individual when they're trying to either implement change or introduce change is resources, is money. Now, there was a perception, or could have been a perception, that during your tenure there was, budget was an issue. And not only just budget in terms of what you needed for the office, but also the support that you needed from fellow constitutional officers. How did you go about that? Or what are some of the strategies that you would want to be able to encourage to someone who's leading change, and those tools are not available to them, or that support is not available to them? Thank you.
Thank you. So two questions for Dr. Ouko. This last one on resources, and the first one on courage, the courage to change. Christine, that was the specific question to you from Winnie on faith-based cultural transformation in a secular environment. And the question on poverty, I'd like and manufacturing, I'd like maybe Flora to handle that. And I'd like Dr. Ogutu to talk, and so you can respond to this, but maybe the others can also just mention at the end of your question very specifically the point raised by Nyokabi about failure, because I think we learn a lot more from people's failures, not only from their successes. So I'm sure you didn't score 100% in everything you wanted to do. So maybe at the end of your questions, just mention what were your biggest failures in the area of change or other spheres, and how would you do things differently if you had to do it over. Let's start with Dr. Ogutu, Christine, Flora, and then, Dr. Ouko, Christine, Flora, and then Dr. Ogutu.
Thank you very much for those very useful questions. I think talking about courage, where would one have been getting this courage? You know, the courage, first of all, you must yourself respond to the mission which you have, to say that, make that mission must be a passionate mission. It's a mission which is, you recognize there's a bigger call behind it than just what you're doing. And that bigger call is to me, was just to be able to wake up and say, today I'm going to do something useful to change or to touch somebody else's life, or to protect something of a public or of our heritage. So once with that, that actually would be motivating, driving you every single morning. And if you wake up every single morning with that thought, there is always a new challenge. And so long as there is challenge, you really don't think of much of, you think of achieving, and that in itself breeds the courage which is required for this. And in a way, it is what you call a purpose. You wake up with a purpose, and there is so many purposes every single morning which encourages one in this situation. And above all, really, you have to believe in prayer. Somehow you must pray for every single day, and you'll continue. And you'll see a lot of things, challenges come, but somehow there is a solution. And it goes on day in, day out. Sometimes we talk of failure or whatever, but sometimes the fact that those who should know better, and much as you are trying your best, they simply are becoming a blockage. In other words, they ask you to do something, but it is them themselves who are a blockage. In other words, you're not getting the confidence which you need from those who should know better, those who should protect you. And some of my time, I think, was, in a way, sometimes fighting battles which really need not be battles. Need not be battles. So those are serious issues, and those are some things which you must recognize that in life you will be fighting such battles. But if you are focused in what you are doing, you have belief in what you are doing, those then find a way to be solved. Values, and much as we are doing whatever we are doing, we still have the corruption, we still have everyday, scandals and so forth. We must believe that things must change and have to change, and what am I doing to change it? So you must be always hopeful of the good side. You must be looking forward to the positive side, There are many negatives, but concentrating on negatives is one thing which you should not do so much if you are going to bring change. You must be seeing a picture, a rosy picture, a place where we should go, a place which is better than here. So once you have that in you, and we as a country, we must have that. Things have to change. Really, we can't sit here and imagine continue doing these things and our children, our grandchildren are coming up in a hopeless situation. We must have it in us to try and live something better. And it's still doable. The issue of resources was one which was a real challenge, but one has to be pragmatic, one has to be responsible in resources. The point is how well was I or were we using the little resources we were given? And that one I can demonstrate that we did use the resources in the most effective manner. During my time, within 3 years, I managed to build offices in Garissa within 15 months. And if I had to show you the photos, then you realize how much wastage we have in our system. I've managed to build an office in Garissa within 15 months, within the budget. I managed to build an office in Kakamega within 15 months, within the budget. I managed to build one in Eldoret within 15 months. Yet the office had been there for 50 years and this had never been done. So resources, you must demonstrate the little you are given, how well you've used, then more will come. To negotiate for more is not an issue.
Thank you. Christine?
Winnie threw me such a difficult question, but anyway, I'll try to attempt to answer. Your question was around how to implement a faith-based culture transformation in a secular organization. I can't really say we've achieved that. What I could say about that is one of the experiences we've had as an organization, just in line with what Dr. Pierce shared with us earlier, was how to help people find purpose and meaning. I would say that's a very good start point. So in our experience, part of our program, one of our programs that we ran was a purpose-driven sort of program that to help all our employees identify their purpose. And you cannot do that without touching faith to some level. And that became an entry point for us to begin to have those discussions openly. So in early 2018, we ran a program across all our, for all our employees, where we helped people to identify their purpose and their strengths. What we found, this was helpful because if you're trying to shift people into a new purpose as an organization, then you also have to help them link it to their own individual purpose. So we ran this program, and through that, we found that the aspect of the spirituality started to come through, and we began to have conversations. And thereafter, what happened is that we started having groups of people who wanted to start meeting up and pray and, you know, have discussions every morning. And because it's a secular organization, you really can't, it was not really something that was being managed centrally, but we allowed it to start happening. And so what's been happening is there are small groups of people who started meeting to pray, started meeting to have fellowships. Throughout the transition process, people recognized the role of prayer, and they would meet up to pray, because there were times through this change that were very difficult, and people would realize we really also need divine intervention. And so we let those things also take root as and when. It's not something that we were managing centrally, but we did highlight the need for each and every individual to find ways to live out their purpose, irrespective of the faith that they subscribe to, without, you know, being shouting too much about it. But slowly by slowly, I think it takes. We talk about a mustard seed principle, allowing the mustard seed to begin to grow. And I think eventually that's our hope, that that momentum will build up. So it's still a process. Even when we talk about culture transformation, even as of now, we still have the second phase of the culture transformation process. Yes, we've rebranded, but there's still a lot of work again to go into this whole thing.
Let's have Flora, on manufacturing.
All right, my question is about corruption and how, as much as we're trying to achieve more to the GDP, I think... and fighting poverty. All right. Talking about the corruption one of the things, of course, we do at KAM is advocacy. So yes, there are a lot of bottlenecks, but that's what we do. We call out the bottlenecks. You know, so assume you're clearing a machine and, you know, you at the port and you're asked to facilitate. One of the things we encourage our members is do not facilitate. We have a help desk call and say, this is where I'm stuck. And we are able then to go up to the, you know, to the next level. Kajo is obviously something that really, really disturbs people. So what we do is every so often we'll actually go to Kajo and sit with them and say, this is how you're disturbing our manufacturers. Of course, we know there's a big informal sector, and one of the things we've been trying to do is to make them become formal. And one of their biggest problems, they tell us, why should we become formal? When you become formal is when you're harassed by everybody. I'm in the industrial area, and you can have NSSF come in the morning, NHIF come in the afternoon, KRA. In fact, we have the part what our watchman is, he's actually a gatekeeper. As in, you come in, and we'll even go back to the book and say, no. You imagine you can't come because your people were here 3 days ago. But we've gotten that strength because, of course, we're able to advocate and go back and speak out. So I think that is one of the issues. But I'll also say it happens in areas also in private sector. You know, the SMEs lately were, retail do not pay. They take long to pay, 90 days, 120 days. And it had gotten to a stage where now we started being told, can you facilitate for your check to come out? And it was during my time at CAM, and I said, no, we really have to deal with this payment issue. So what we started doing through the Ministry of Industrialization is we called the retail supermarkets and said, listen, guys, you cannot be selling in cash and taking this long to pay people. And we came out with a prompt payment code. We actually came out with prompt payment regulation, and what we're hoping now is to have it institutionalized so that, passed through the parliament so that now they're actually forced to pay within 60 to 90 days. So that's what we generally try to do at KAM. So it's just to unlock and as much as possible call out when we actually find the issues. The question about poverty, I didn't quite understand what the question was.
It was more about manufacturing and how manufacturing can help contribute to alleviating poverty.
I see, okay. One of the things, Kenya is an agricultural-based economy, of course, and the saddest thing about us is that we are still very, very basic. If it is tea, 97% is exported in raw form. If it is coffee, we know the story. If it is milk, one of the things we're not doing is moving up the value chain. And again, these are conversations that we are having. We are trying to get as many, and around the Big Four, and you hear the president saying, I'm looking for funding to support the Big Four. It's areas like this. How do we encourage people to move up the value chain? For example, for us in tea, how do we export our tea value added here? Why do tomatoes, they're in season for 3 months, and then for the rest of the year, we're actually importing them from Tanzania and other countries? Why are we getting milk from other areas? So one of the things we're trying to do is to encourage people to move up the value chain. The other thing is post-harvest loss is also very, very high. So can we put cold storages? Can we improve transportation? Can we improve logistics? Can we give people access to better markets so that we're not only fighting for the local market, but when a crop is, when we have a lot of something, can we also be able to export it? So those are the kind of initiatives that we really are trying to do to alleviate poverty in the country. And of course, the other one we must talk about is illicit trade, especially the counterfeiting issue. How do we reduce that so that we can continue to encourage manufacturing, giving them a bigger market, and encouraging local farms to actually do the right thing?
Thank you. Dr. Gutu, your biggest failures.
Oh, did you want us to talk about biggest failure as well?
Let's go to start and then we'll, yeah.
Okay, actually, I'll try to be at my most concise yet powerful, touching on 2 other issues and then get to that.
Sure.
So, corruption. Like I told you, every year at Strathmore we pick a theme. One of our values is integrity. So this year's theme is promoting ethical behavior. And we're ready to partner with anyone who has a big idea. We want to have a national impact on the corruption question. So if you have an idea that could lead to research, to change of behavior, we're going to have an ethical conference. So if you think you have an idea that can make an impact, do get in touch with me. Find me on LinkedIn and Facebook or something, and we will have that conversation. To your question on courage, just a few basic principles. One is, when you see a little kid afraid of a chicken or a dog, and then you grab them as the parent, they suddenly stop being afraid. They start even, don't mess around with me. Suddenly they're all powerful. Why? Because they're in their father's or mother's arms. So that's a principle you can use to get courage, which is called divine filiation. Conscious of the fact that you are God's son or daughter. And that's why we talk about, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. So suddenly the fear goes away. Why would you be afraid if you had a father that powerful? So I can do all things in him who strengthens me. And then also we care. So you'll see a little kid in danger and the mother or father will rush and grab the kid and face the danger themselves. They're not thinking about how hard it is, what the danger is. It's because they care so much, they forget about the danger. So if you focus on other people, not your own safety, your own wellness, like I really care about these people and I will not let anyone mess around with them, suddenly you get courage. And then the last principle I can give you to get courage is purpose. So if you were born to get something done, this is the whole purpose of your existence. God cannot fail. God doesn't lose battles. If God created you to do that, then you just know victory is assured. So you can just march in. You say, this is what I was born to do. This is my mission. Why would I be afraid? So lean on those 3 principles and you'll find that you can be extremely courageous. No problem at all. And then now coming to the failures question. Great question. Of course, I've made so many failures. Like I was trying to say now, which of the hundreds of failures that I've had should I pick? Because I'm still making mistakes. I made one this morning. I mean, So the main thing is what you learn from the mistakes. I remember about 20 years ago almost firing someone after just hearing one side of the story. And then it's like this voice says, please suspend judgment until you hear the other side. And then I heard it, and it was totally different, and now I could reconcile the two and make a fair judgment. So I learned one of my biggest lessons: always listen to both sides before you make a decision. Suspend judgment, listen. So basically what I get from my failures is the opportunity to learn, and as you learn, you become better and better and better. And it reminds me of a word that's central to what all of us believe, one of my favorite all-time words, which is redemption. So remember that you can make a mistake, pick yourself up, and learn, and then go to a better place. This notion of once you've fallen, you're done. You're like in boxing, down and out. You can be down, we count up to 10, you get up at the count of 5. You get back into the fight. You might still win the fight. It's only when you're down and out that it's truly over, at least for that fight. And you could still get up and fight another fight later on. So that word redemption, that you could have sinned, you could have fallen, and there's the opportunity to try again, is amazing. And when does redemption end? When you die. So meaning you can be redeemed in the last 5 minutes of your life. You have lived an incredibly horrible life, and you can still be great. And if you think I'm joking, look at the 2 thieves who died right next to Jesus. The last 3 hours of their lives, they're thieves, murderers. That's how they've lived their life. And one of them starts mocking Jesus, and the other tells him, shut up. Who do you think you are? We deserve to be here. This man, I know him. He's like the best guy, and the only reason here is politics, envy, jealousy. We deserve to be here, so shut up, leave him alone, and if nobody believes in this kingdom of his, I do. And then he turns and tells him, look, Jesus, when you get to that kingdom of yours, just remember me. I mean, I know I'm a thief, I'm a murderer, but when you get to that kingdom, please remember me. And in my imagination, because I love stories, I always tell this story, is who do you think was the first person to enter heaven? After Adam and Eve sinned, no one could go to heaven until Jesus opened the doors. So Jesus dies that day, opens the gates of heaven, and who is walking side by side with him? It is the guy we now call the good thief. And the angels are like, wait, you don't know who you're walking with. Like, that can't be. I mean, what about Moses? What about Enoch? What about David? What about all these good people? John the Baptist. I mean, how can this guy, Jesus says, he is coming into heaven with me because he's my buddy, and when everyone's failed to stand up for me, including my own apostles, this guy, and then, so the last 3 hours of his life, he saw redemption. So never sort of underestimate the power of redemption. So if you fall, you can get up. And then as leaders, this is how I also look at it. I know I'm taking a lot of time, but it's important to me. So when you see your failures, then you stop beating up too hard on other people. You stop having this attitude of, I'm always right. Why aren't people as good as I am in this organization? You know how vulnerable you are. You know the mistakes it took to get you to where you are. And you see where they are in their trajectory, and you give them a chance. So the first time they fail, you come and say, don't worry, I've made bigger mistakes in my time. The important thing is to learn. Of course, if you don't learn, I will have to fire you because we can't operate like this. But learn from it. Get up, learn, become better. And if you do that, then first of all, you'll be approachable as a leader. You'll create a culture of learning. You will make people speak up when they make a mistake, not when it's too late, because if they sent the wrong consignment, then they'll hide it. They'll start thinking, how do I shift the blame to someone else? They'll focus so much on clearing their name and shifting the blame, they won't save the client or the company. But if you have this approachable manner where you can accept mistakes, they'll rush and say, boss, I just made a terrible mistake and we need to do something. You'll say, okay, that was terrible, but Let's do something. Let's call the client. Like, sorry, you're going to get the wrong consignment. We understand how important it is to you. We are DHLing the correct consignment. We'll take it back at our cost. We are so very sorry. You retain the client and you get loyalty. But if you don't accept mistakes, you create a culture of finger pointing, self-justification and self-defense. No loyalty, you will collapse. So it's so important to accept mistakes in yourselves and in others and to learn from it. So redemption.
Thank you very much. Christine, just your big failures.
Without picking a specific one, I think just to generalize, some of the failures sometimes I've had or we've experienced in some of the campaigns we've run, because going through change, you have to run a lot of campaigns, awareness, and you've got to be able to listen to what people are saying. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned is there are powerful people and there is the power of the people. Those are two different things. One thing I learned in this process, and I've been a HR practitioner for a long time, is that sometimes we listen to the powerful people, but they don't quite represent the people. Yeah? So you move ahead with a change, you will design a program, and you've listened to powerful people. The people with the titles that Dr. Pierce was talking about. Yeah? They have the title, they tell you, they have a certain view, perspective. But if you miss out to go down to the power of the people, the actual people, you can really miss it big time. So you need to balance between the powerful people and the power of the people. The power of the people, I've come to realize, is greater. Their voice is greater than the powerful people. So in leading change, have your pulse right down there, mashinani, because that's where it actually happens. And if you don't listen to the pulse down there, and so one of the things that in the change programs we've been running, I've not been using people with positional titles. We came up with change champions, people who are recognized as influencers on the ground. Those are the people we've been driving our messages through, not through the powerful people.
Thank you. Flora, any big failure?
It reminds me of kwa ground, vitu ni different. I think for me, one of my biggest failures is when now, when I got the position of chairperson of anti-counterfeit. Because what I did is I've never run I've been in public sector. So then I come in with private sector mentality. What's the strategy? What are we doing? When are we having the meeting? Let's go out to Mombasa. And I remember the first strategy meeting we went to, and government is a little relaxed. So we go, we have the meeting, and by lunchtime I'm saying, so what are we doing in the afternoon? What are we doing in the evening? And for 3 days, I sort of just kept getting an agenda. Let's go see the port, let's go do, And the message came back, and they said, please tell the chair to stop pushing us so hard. And for me, I think that was my biggest learning is this is private sector, this is different. But what big mistake had I made? I had not carried the people along with me. I just came in and thought, this is how we do it. Because and that's generally an issue I struggle with, because I drive for results. This is what has to be done, and this is what is needed. And you need to then really rally people. And I remember Dr. Pierce this morning saying, you really have to win the hearts of the people. And that's my biggest learning in leadership is take your time, get them on board, and move with them. So for me, that has been my big one. And so let me give you another example where I quite got it very wrong. 15% of our staff complement had disciplinary cases. So I kept saying, let's sort this thing out, and let's push. It took us, I think, 6 months to actually have those disciplinary cases and everything, whatever. And the stories that were coming through, I was completely horrified. Although at that time, then I said, okay, fine. What we're going to do is have a change management program. We didn't have the resources, but we've managed to put it in this budget. And now they're going through change management. They're really, really appreciating it.
My failures. I think there is the mistakes and there is the failures. The mistakes, there are a number of them, they're always there, but as you say, you learn from them. So that's not what I would call failure. For me, in the position and the mandate which I was given, my biggest failure, I feel, is never had, for not doing my work in a manner that I got the confidence of the people who are up there. I think that I take that failure on my side. I ask myself, was there something I could have done better to get that confidence? That's one failure which I take, I would say. The other one is one which I said we have come up with a very good team. We have developed a lot. The office was on the high. But that it has taken the system that long to get a replacement for me. It makes me feel like a failure, as if I had not developed enough people inside. Yet I believed I had, but it now turns out maybe it was a failure on my side. That is a very big disappointment to me, that up to now we haven't had a replacement for the office of the Auditor General. Yet I thought had developed internally and also raised the profile of the office such that it can also attract people from outside. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. And I think as we end this, has this been useful? I think it's been very, very great. Just listening, kind of, seeing behind the curtain, in a sense, what's really going on in our organizations. Because, you may read something in the newspaper, but you never get this level of insight and detail from leaders of organizations about the challenges, the successes, as well as the failures. I'd just like, in closing, to encourage us with the fact that change is really what Christ, we as Christ followers, need to remember that we are following in the footsteps of someone who was the author of change. Christ came from heaven to earth really to start a change revolution. And it started as he did through his teaching by changing our minds, by renewing our minds. So as it says in Philippians 2:5, let this mind that was in Christ be also in you. That's where it starts, with the mind of Christ. And guess what? When we talked about having a coalition of change, the one person to have in that coalition is Jesus Christ himself, because it is his desire, as the New Testament tells us, to give us the kingdom. So he is in the business of transforming and changing all our organizations. And I think just a final shout out to what Dr. Ogutu, he mentioned this big word, redemption, which is kind of winning back and renewing and restoring to what Christ fully intended. God intends not just to redeem our souls, but to redeem every aspect of culture. Our businesses, our politics, our governance can be redeemed. Our homes, our families can be redeemed. Our judiciary, our academia, our manufacturing can be redeemed. And he wants you, as his partners, to be co-workers with him in that big business of redeeming all of his kingdom. So thank you very much, and please join the enterprise, join the mission that God is fully engaged in redeeming all of his world. He can't do it from heaven. He needs you as his redemption and his transformation agents. Please give the panelists one more round of applause. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please.
Nitasimama, nitajua